The transport ship descended through the atmosphere without warning, its hull scorched from emergency re-entry. Daniel Foster sat on his porch, coffee growing cold in his hand as the vessel crashed into the meadow behind his farmhouse. Smoke billowed from the wreckage, and he was already running before his brain caught up with his legs. 40 years of military service had trained him for this. His retirement meant nothing when lives were at stake. The ship's hull cracked open, releasing a hiss of pressurized air and 11 figures stumbling into the knee-high grass. They weren't human. Their skin shimmered with bioluminescent patterns, their frames tall and willowy, their eyes large and adapted for low-light conditions. They were Varani. Daniel recognized the species from his service in the outer colonies. The females collapsed one by one, their breathing labored and rapid. He could see the desperation in their movements, the way they clutched at each other for support. "Can you understand me?" Daniel asked, approaching with his hands visible and empty. The nearest one, her skin pulsing with faint blue light, nodded weakly. "English, yes. We need sanctuary. The Krell Armada hunted us. Our husbands fought. They are gone. We are all that remains. Widows." 11 alien widows fleeing a war he'd heard whispers about during his final years of service. The Krell were systematic in their genocide, wiping out entire populations when they encountered resistance. These women had escaped somehow, but they wouldn't last long without help. My house. Now, Daniel didn't wait for agreement. He lifted the nearest Varani into his arms, surprised by how light she was despite her height. Her skin felt warm against his hands, almost feverish. "The rest of you, follow me. Stay close." They moved as a group, supporting each other across the field. Daniel's farmhouse sat isolated, 20 miles from the nearest town. He'd chosen this location specifically for the solitude, never imagining it would become a refuge for survivors of an interstellar war. Inside, he cleared the living room, pulling blankets from closets and setting up makeshift beds. The Varani women collapsed gratefully, their strength finally giving out. Daniel moved between them, checking vital signs as best he could. Their physiology was different from humans, but the basics remained the same. Elevated temperature, rapid pulse, signs of dehydration and exhaustion. "Water," the blue one said. Her name was Lissa, she explained between sips. "We need water and rest. The Krell destroyed our colony 3 cycles ago. We have been running ever since." Daniel brought them water, then food from his kitchen. They ate cautiously, their digestive systems struggling with Earth cuisine, but accepting it nonetheless. As they recovered, he listened to their story. The Krell had arrived without provocation, their massive warships blocking out the sun. The Varani Defense Forces had fought valiantly, buying time for civilian evacuations. These 11 women were scientists, engineers, medical personnel. Their husbands had been soldiers, every single one dying in the final defense of the evacuation point. "Why Earth?" Daniel asked. "Why here specifically?" Lissa's bioluminescent patterns flickered with what he interpreted as sadness. "Your planet is protected by the Galactic Council. The Krell cannot attack here without consequences. We hoped to request asylum, but our ship failed. We crashed instead of landing properly. Now we are stranded." Daniel looked at the 11 faces watching him with exhaustion and hope. He'd spent 40 years fighting humanity's wars across the stars. He'd retired to this farm to escape violence, to find peace in isolation. But peace meant nothing if he turned away those who needed help. "You're safe here," he said. "The Krell want you? They'll have to go through me first." The transport crash had triggered automated alerts. Within hours, human authorities would arrive to investigate. Daniel had that long to decide how much to tell them, how to protect these refugees who'd literally fallen from the sky into his retirement. The Varani women watched him with cautious gratitude, understanding that their fate rested in the hands of this one aging human soldier. Outside, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. Daniel stood at his window, watching the approaching storm and knowing that his quiet retirement had just ended. The Krell Armada was out there somewhere, hunting these women. And if they tracked them to Earth, to his farm, then every moment of his military training would matter. He checked his old rifle, still maintained despite years of disuse. The weapon felt familiar in his hands, a reminder of who he'd been, who he might need to be again. The Varani needed protection, and Daniel Foster had never abandoned anyone under his care. The storm broke over the farmhouse as night fell, rain hammering against the roof. Inside, the 11 widows slept fitfully, their glowing skin patterns dimming as exhaustion finally claimed them. Daniel sat in his chair, rifle across his lap, watching the darkness beyond his windows. He was one retired human, alone except for 11 alien refugees. But he'd faced worse odds before. And this time he was fighting for something that mattered, not territory or politics or strategic interests, just lives, 11 lives that depended on him. The night deepened, and Daniel kept watch, ready for whatever came next. The human authorities arrived at dawn, 3 black vehicles rolling up his dirt road with the efficiency of military operations. Daniel had expected this. The crash had been impossible to hide, and his farm's isolation only delayed the inevitable. He met them on his porch, the same spot where he'd been drinking coffee when the Varani ship fell from the sky. Agent Lisa Grant stepped out first, her federal identification already in hand. "Mr. Foster, we detected an unregistered spacecraft entering Earth's atmosphere yesterday evening. Our scans indicate it crashed on your property." "It did," Daniel confirmed. He didn't bother with denials. "You'll find it in the East Meadow. The occupants are inside my house. They're refugees seeking asylum from the Krell Armada." Grant's expression shifted, professional mask slipping for just a moment. "The Krell? You're certain?" "The Varani don't lie, Agent Grant. 11 civilian women, all widowed when the Krell destroyed their colony. They came here because Earth is protected by Council Treaty. I suggest we honor that protection." The conversation moved inside, where the Varani women had gathered in Daniel's living room. Lissa spoke for them, her English more practiced now after a night's rest. She explained their situation with careful precision, providing colony identification codes and details about the Krell attack that Grant's team verified through galactic databases. "The legal situation is complicated," Grant admitted after an hour of discussion. "Earth doesn't have formal refugee protocols for non-human species. The Galactic Council Treaty protects our planet, but it doesn't automatically extend to everyone who arrives here." "Then make it extend," Daniel said. His voice carried the weight of 4 decades commanding troops in hostile territory. These women did nothing wrong. They're scientists, doctors, engineers. They're not criminals or terrorists. They're survivors of genocide and were bound by basic decency to help them. Grant studied him carefully. "You understand what you're asking? The Krell are actively hunting Varani survivors. Granting asylum could draw their attention to Earth. Let them come." Daniel's hand rested on the rifle he'd kept close all night. "The Council Treaty is clear. Any attack on Earth means war with the entire Council. The Krell are aggressive, but they're not suicidal. They won't risk that fight." The negotiations stretched through the morning. Grant made calls to superiors, to council representatives, to legal experts who'd never considered this exact scenario. The Varani women waited patiently, their fate being decided by others once again. Daniel noted how they supported each other, hands clasped together, bioluminescent patterns synchronized in what he recognized as a Varani comfort ritual. Finally, Grant returned with news: provisional asylum pending full council review. The women can stay on Earth, but they'll need a sponsor. Someone responsible for their integration, their conduct, their adaptation to human society. "I'll do it," Daniel said immediately. "Mr. Foster, you're 73 years old. You live alone on an isolated farm. These women will need housing, employment, education about human culture. The responsibility is significant. I'm aware. Daniel looked at the 11 faces watching him with desperate hope. I've got a farm that needs work. I've got a house with enough space if we're creative. I've got 40 years of experience working with non-human species. And I've got a promise to keep. I told them they were safe here. I meant it. Grant's team spent the afternoon processing paperwork, documenting the Varani women's arrival, and establishing their legal status. Medical personnel examined them, declaring their physiology compatible with Earth's environment, though they'd need specialized nutrition supplements. Translators provided language instruction devices, small earpieces that would help them learn English more rapidly. As the government personnel finally departed, Daniel found himself alone with 11 alien women who were now his legal responsibility. The weight of it settled on his shoulders, different from military command, but no less serious. These weren't soldiers under his orders. They were civilians who'd lost everything, looking to him for guidance in a completely foreign world. I know this isn't what you expected, he said to them that evening. Earth isn't your home. Your people, your culture, everything familiar is gone. But you're alive, and that matters. We'll figure out the rest together. Lissa stepped forward, speaking for the group. We owe you a debt, Daniel Foster. You could have turned us away. Instead, you fought for us with your authorities. You offered us sanctuary when you owed us nothing. This is more than we hoped for. You don't owe me anything, Daniel replied. But if you want to help, I've got fields that need planting, fences that need mending, and a whole farm that's been neglected since I retired. You said your engineers and scientists think you can handle some agricultural work? The question brought the first genuine smiles he'd seen from them. The idea of purpose, of contribution, clearly appealed after days of helpless flight. They gathered around his kitchen table, and Daniel sketched out plans for expanding the farmhouse, converting his barn into additional living space, establishing sustainable food production that could support 12 people instead of one. The Varani women brought skills he'd underestimated. Myra had been a structural engineer, capable of designing efficient expansions to his existing buildings. Cass understood hydroponics, able to grow Varani-compatible food alongside human crops. Mira was a medical specialist, her knowledge of biology translating across species. Each woman possessed expertise that transformed his simple farm into something more ambitious. They worked through the night, planning and designing. Daniel's retirement project became their collective rehabilitation. The isolation he'd craved became their protection. The farm he'd bought to live out his final years in solitude became a community of survivors building something new. But as they planned, Daniel's military instincts whispered warnings. The Varani ship's crash had been detected by human authorities within hours. Other powers with sensor arrays pointed at Earth would have noticed it too. The Krell hunted Varani survivors with systematic determination. They might respect Council Treaty enough to avoid direct attack, but there were other ways to eliminate targets. He didn't share these concerns with the women that night. They'd earned one evening of hope, one night of planning futures instead of mourning pasts. But Daniel checked his rifle again before bed, and he made a mental list of old military contacts who might help if things went wrong. The Varani women settled into their makeshift beds, their bioluminescent patterns dimming as sleep claimed them. Daniel sat in his chair once more, watching over them. 73 years old, retired for 5 years, and suddenly responsible for 11 lives that depended on his protection. He'd thought his fighting days were over. He'd been wrong. The nature of the fight had changed, but the stakes remained the same. These women needed him, and Daniel Foster had never walked away from duty. Outside, the night was calm, but storms were coming. Daniel could feel it in his bones, in the instincts honed across 40 years of war. The Krell wouldn't give up. The Council Treaty protected Earth, but treaties had loopholes. And somewhere out there, someone was calculating how to exploit those loopholes. Daniel closed his eyes for just a moment, allowing himself a brief rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The expansion of the farm, the integration of 11 alien women into his isolated life, the constant vigilance required to keep them safe. It was a lot for one old soldier. But he'd faced worse odds before. The first week passed in a blur of construction and adaptation. The Varani women proved remarkably capable, their technical skills translating surprisingly well to manual labor. Myra directed the barn conversion with precision, transforming the old structure into comfortable living quarters with efficient use of space. Cass established the hydroponics system in what had been Daniel's unused greenhouse, cultivating both earth crops and Varani nutritional plants from seeds she'd carried in her escape. Daniel discovered that Varani worked differently from humans. They didn't tire the same way, their endurance sustained over longer periods but requiring more frequent rest intervals. Their hands, longer-fingered and more delicate than human ones, excelled at detailed work. Nira spent her rest periods teaching the others about Earth biology, helping them understand their new environment, the farmhouse filled with sounds Daniel had forgotten. Conversation, laughter, the rhythm of shared meals. His isolation had been self-imposed, a retreat from decades of loss and violence. Now he found himself at the center of a community, the 11 women looking to him for guidance but offering their own expertise in return. Lisa Grant visited on the 5th day, ostensibly to check on the asylum integration. She found Daniel and 3 Varani women repairing the farm's irrigation system, their hands muddy and their conversation focused on water pressure calculations. "This is unexpected," Grant said, watching Lisa adjust a pipe connection with engineering precision. "I thought you'd struggle with the cultural adjustment." "They're not tourists," Daniel replied. "They're survivors with skills. Give people purpose, and they adapt quickly." Grant pulled him aside while the Varani continued working. "I need to be direct, Mr. Foster. We've intercepted communications from a Krell intelligence vessel in the outer system. They're aware the Varani survivors came to Earth. They're testing the boundaries of the Council Treaty, looking for legal justification to demand extradition." Daniel's jaw tightened. "On what grounds?" "They're claiming the women stole military secrets when they fled. War crimes." "It's fabricated, but the Krell are pushing the Council for a hearing. If they can establish legal cause, the treaty might not protect your refugees." "When's the hearing?" 2 weeks. "The Council is sending a tribunal to Earth. They'll interview the women, review evidence, make a determination. If the ruling goes against them, we'll have to surrender them to Krell custody." Daniel looked at the women working on his irrigation system, their bioluminescent patterns bright in the afternoon sun. They'd started to relax here, the constant fear fading as they built something new. The idea of handing them over to the species that had murdered their families was unacceptable. "What do we need to win?" he asked. "Proof that they're civilians, documentation of their backgrounds, credentials, anything that contradicts the Krell accusations, and character witnesses who can testify to their conduct and intentions." "I'll testify. One retired soldier's word won't be enough. The Council requires more substantial evidence." Grant hesitated. "There's another factor. The Krell are arguing that humans can't be trusted to properly contain potentially dangerous aliens. They're using your isolation, your military background, as evidence that Earth isn't taking the asylum seriously." Daniel understood immediately. They want to see the women integrated into human society, living in cities, working visible jobs, proving they're not hiding. "Exactly. Your farm is perfect for protecting them, but it plays into the Krell narrative of secrecy and isolation. The tribunal will want evidence of genuine integration." After Grant left, Daniel gathered the 11 women in his kitchen. He explained the situation without softening the threat. They deserved the truth. Their lives depended on the next 2 weeks, on their ability to prove they were exactly what they claimed to be. "We need to go public," Lissa said immediately. "Hide nothing. Show human society who we are." "That's dangerous," Daniel countered. "There are humans who fear aliens, who might react with violence. And there are Krell who will definitely kill us if we're extradited, Myra added. We'll take our chances with human fear over Krell certainty. The decision was made. Daniel contacted local media, offering them a story about the alien refugees living on his farm. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 2 days, reporters arrived from across the region, cameras and questions filling his property. The Varani women faced them with remarkable composure, explaining their backgrounds and their flight from genocide. Kepps demonstrated the hydroponics system, showing how Varani agricultural technology could benefit Earth farming. Neera discussed medical research, the potential for sharing knowledge between species. Myra presented architectural designs for sustainable housing adapted to various climates. They weren't just refugees seeking charity. They were skilled professionals offering value. The media coverage spread rapidly. Public opinion divided predictably. Some humans welcomed the Varani, seeing opportunity for cultural exchange and technological advancement. Others demanded their deportation, fearing alien contamination of Earth's society. Death threats arrived alongside offers of support. Daniel's farm became a focal point for both protests and vigils. Through it all, the women continued their work. They expanded the farm's production, establishing sustainable systems that drew interest from agricultural corporations. They published papers on cross-species medicine, collaborating with human researchers. They volunteered at local schools, teaching children about Varani culture and learning about human education. Daniel watched them transform from frightened refugees into confident members of a community they were building themselves. His role shifted from protector to facilitator, helping them navigate human bureaucracy and social customs while they established their own identities. But the Krell weren't idle. Reports came in of increased military presence near Earth's system. Battleships positioned just outside Council-enforced boundaries. The message was clear. They were waiting for the tribunal's decision, ready to enforce extradition if the ruling went their way. 2 days before the hearing, an attempt was made, not military action, but sabotage. Someone cut the power to the farm's greenhouse, destroying weeks of Varani crop cultivation. Someone else contaminated the water supply, causing 3 of the women to fall ill. The attacks were subtle enough to avoid direct Krell fingerprints, but Daniel recognized professional sabotage when he saw it. He increased security, bringing in trusted veterans from his old unit to patrol the property. The farm became an armed camp, rifles visible and watchful. The Varani women adapted to this too, learning to move between guarded checkpoints and accepting the necessity of protection. The night before the tribunal, Daniel sat with Lissa on his porch. The other women were inside, preparing their testimonies and gathering documentation. The farm was quiet except for the subtle sounds of guards moving through the darkness. "Are you afraid?" Daniel asked. "Terrified," Lissa admitted. Her bioluminescent patterns pulsed with colors he'd learned to read as stress markers. "Everything depends on tomorrow. Strangers will decide if we live or die based on legal arguments and political considerations. Our lives reduced to a case number. You've done everything right," Daniel said. "You've proven yourselves, shown what you can contribute. The truth is on your side. Truth doesn't always win in tribunals. You know this. You've seen politics override justice." Daniel couldn't deny it. He'd spent 40 years watching bureaucrats make decisions that cost lives. But he'd also seen courage change outcomes, seen people stand up against impossible odds and prevail. The Varani women had that courage. They'd survived genocide, crossed the stars, and built new lives from nothing. They deserved better than fear on the night before judgment. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "you're not alone. I'll stand with you. And there are thousands of humans who will too. The Krell think we'll abandon you to keep the peace. They're wrong." Lissa's patterns shifted to colors he'd learned meant gratitude. "You've given us more than sanctuary, Daniel Foster. You've given us hope. Whatever the tribunal decides, that matters." Inside the farmhouse, the other women gathered. Their bioluminescent patterns synchronized, creating waves of light that moved through the rooms. It was a Varani mourning ritual, Daniel had learned. They honored their dead husbands, their destroyed colony, their lost futures. But the patterns also carried defiance, the determination of survivors who refused to surrender. Daniel sat with them through the night, one human among 11 aliens, waiting for dawn and the tribunal that would decide everything. His rifle leaned against the wall, ready if legal protection failed and other measures became necessary. He was 73 years old, too old for war, but he'd fight anyway if it came to that. Some things mattered more than age or odds or common sense. The Varani women were worth fighting for. He'd decided that the moment their ship crashed in his meadow. Tomorrow's tribunal would either confirm that decision or force him to defend it through other means. Either way, he was committed. The night deepened, and Daniel kept watch with his alien family, ready for whatever judgment came with the morning light. The tribunal convened in the renovated community center of the nearest town, neutral ground chosen to emphasize transparency. 3 council representatives sat at the judgment table. Ambassador Theron, a towering insectoid kitten with compound eyes that reflected rainbow patterns. Counselor Vex, a floating gaseous entity contained in an environmental suit, and Judge Patricia Williams, humanity's senior representative to the Galactic Council. The Krell sent Overseer Drax, a 7-foot warrior whose gray skin bore ritual scars and whose presence radiated calculated menace. Daniel sat in the front row with the 11 Varani women, all of them dressed in simple Earth clothing that Lissa had chosen specifically to emphasize their integration. No exotic garments or alien accessories. They wanted to appear as residents of Earth, not foreign elements seeking temporary refuge. Overseer Drax opened with accusations delivered in precise, emotionless tones. The 11 women were designated military assets who had accessed classified defense protocols during the colony evacuation. They possessed knowledge of Varani tactical systems and had fled to avoid interrogation about security breaches that had contributed to the colony's fall. Their presence on Earth represented a security risk to Council stability and violated protocols for handling military defectors. The words were carefully constructed lies wrapped in bureaucratic language. Daniel watched the Varani women's bioluminescent patterns flare with outrage, but they remained silent as their legal representative, a human attorney named Marcus Webb, rose to respond. The prosecution's claims are unsubstantiated, Webb stated. Every one of these women held civilian positions. Dr. Neera Vale was a medical researcher specializing in cross-species pathology. Engineer Myra Sen designed civilian infrastructure. Botanist Kess Lorne managed agricultural systems. I have documentation from the Varani colonial records confirming their roles. Webb presented data files recovered from the crashed transport ship, records that the Varani had preserved during their escape, employment histories, educational credentials, research publications. Each document was verified by Council authentication protocols. Impossible to forge. The women weren't soldiers. They were exactly what they claimed to be. Drax countered smoothly. Civilian positions can mask military functions. The Varani colony integrated defense planning into all infrastructure development. These women had access to systems that could be weaponized. Their knowledge makes them military assets regardless of their official titles. The argument was circular and frustrating. By Drax's logic, anyone who understood how their colony functioned was a military target. Judge Williams interrupted before Webb could respond. Overseer Drax, the Council does not recognize such broad definitions of military status. If we accepted your argument, every engineer and scientist in the galaxy could be classified as a military asset. That's absurd. Then consider their flight itself as evidence, Drax pressed. They fled during military engagement, violating proper evacuation protocols. They possessed a spacecraft capable of reaching Earth undetected, suggesting military resources. They crashed on an isolated farm owned by a retired human soldier with extensive combat experience. Every aspect of their arrival suggests covert military operations. Daniel felt the accusation shift toward him. His background was being weaponized against the women he protected. He started to rise, but Lissa's hand on his arm stopped him. She stood instead, her voice steady despite the fear he could read in her patterns. "May I address the tribunal?" Ambassador Theron's compound eyes focused on her. "You may speak, Lissa Kren. I am a xenobiologist. My research focused on microbial adaptation in extreme environments. My husband was Captain Dan Kren of the Varani Defense Force. When the Krell attacked, he and his unit held the evacuation point while civilian transports launched. He died, buying us time to escape. There was nothing covert about our flight. We ran because the alternative was death." Her voice cracked slightly on the word death, but she continued. "We didn't choose Mr. Foster's farm. Our transport was failing. We crashed there by chance. He could have let us die in the wreckage. Instead, he saved us, sheltered us, and fought for our right to exist. The Krull want to paint us as military assets because they cannot tolerate Varani survivors. Every one of us is evidence of their genocide. They would rather eliminate us than face accountability for destroying our colony." The chamber fell silent. Lissa's words hung in the air, a direct accusation that shifted the tribunal's focus. This wasn't about military secrets or security risks. It was about covering up genocide. Drax's expression didn't change, but Daniel noticed the slight tension in his posture. The Krell Armada responded to Varani aggression in accordance with Council-approved defense protocols. Liar. The word came from Myra, who stood beside Lissa. The Krell attacked without provocation. They targeted civilian centers first, schools, hospitals, agricultural zones. They wanted maximum casualties, not military victory. I watched them bomb refugee shelters from orbit. I saw them target escape pods. They weren't fighting a war, they were exterminating a species. One by one, the other Varani women stood. Each shared their testimony. Captain described hiding children in underground shelters while Krell bombardment turned the surface into molten glass. Nira recounted treating burn victims in a hospital that was targeted twice in one day. Each story built upon the last, creating a narrative of systematic slaughter that contradicted every Krell claim of justified military response. Judge Williams exchanged glances with the other council representatives. Ambassador Theron's rainbow patterns shifted to colors that Daniel's translator earpiece identified as deep concern. Even Counselor Vex's containment suit seemed to pulse with agitation. "These are serious allegations," Williams said carefully. "Genocide is the most severe charge one species can level against another. Do you have evidence beyond testimony?" Nira stepped forward, holding a data chip she'd kept hidden until this moment. Medical records from the colony hospital. Patient intake data showing injury patterns. 83% of casualties during the first orbital bombardment were children, elderly, or disabled individuals in designated safe zones. That's not collateral damage from military engagement. That's targeted elimination of vulnerable populations. Webb took the data chip and submitted it to the tribunal's verification system. The Council's analytical AI processed the information, confirming its authenticity. The chamber's display screens showed injury statistics, heat maps of bombardment patterns, temporal data proving that Krell forces had systematically targeted civilian infrastructure. Drax remained motionless, but Daniel saw the calculation in his eyes. The Overseer had expected accusations of military defection, not documented evidence of war crimes. The tribunal's purpose had shifted from judging the Varani women to questioning Krell conduct. "This evidence requires full council investigation," Ambassador Theron stated. "The charges of genocide must be examined thoroughly. And while that investigation proceeds, what happens to these women?" Webb asked. "Do they remain under Earth's protection, or are they surrendered to the accused party?" The question forced the tribunal's hand. Judge Williams conferred briefly with her fellow representatives before rendering judgment. The Council finds insufficient evidence to support Overseer Drax's claims of military defection. The Varani women are granted permanent asylum status on Earth, with full rights and protections. Furthermore, the Council initiates formal investigation into Krell military conduct during the Varani colony engagement. Overseer Drax, your government will be required to submit complete tactical records for review. Drax's expression finally cracked, a flash of cold rage before he reasserted control. The Krell Armada does not recognize this tribunal's authority to investigate sovereign military operations. Then the Krell Armada places itself in violation of Council treaty, Williams replied. You have 30 days to comply or face sanctions. The tribunal adjourned. Drax departed without another word, his movements precise and controlled despite obvious fury. Daniel knew that look. He'd seen it in enemy commanders who'd been outmaneuvered. Dangerous men who would seek other ways to achieve their objectives when legal channels failed. The Varani women surrounded Daniel in the corridor outside the chamber, their bioluminescent patterns bright with relief and gratitude. Reporters pressed close, questions flying. Webb handled the media while Daniel guided the women toward the exits, toward the vehicles that would take them back to the farm. It's not over, he said quietly to Lissa as they walked. Drax won't accept this. I know, she replied. But we won today. That matters. They returned to the farm as evening fell. The property had become a fortress in their absence, Daniel's veteran friends maintaining security while the tribunal decided fates. Now those same veterans celebrated, opening beer and sharing stories with the Varani women who'd proven themselves in the most important battle of their lives. Daniel stood on his porch, watching the celebration and thinking about what came next. The tribunal had granted asylum, but it had also made the Varani women visible targets. The investigation into Krell war crimes would proceed slowly through bureaucratic channels while Drax and his superiors calculated revenge. The Council Treaty protected Earth from military attack, but there were other methods: assassins, sabotage, political pressure. The Krell had resources and determination. They would come eventually, in whatever form they deemed most effective. Daniel checked his rifle, the weapon that had become a constant companion. 73 years old, responsible for 11 alien women who'd become family. He'd thought retirement meant peace. Instead, it had brought purpose, the most important mission of his life, protecting people who'd done nothing wrong except survive. Inside the farmhouse, laughter echoed. The Varani women celebrated with Daniel's friends, building connections and proving that different species could find common ground. They'd won their right to exist today. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight belonged to hope. Daniel allowed himself a small smile. He'd made the right choice that day when the transport crashed in his meadow. Running toward danger instead of away from it, choosing to help instead of hiding in isolation. These women had given him purpose when he thought his useful years were over. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, one retired human and 11 alien widows, building a community against forces that wanted them eliminated. The odds weren't good. They never were. But Daniel Foster had spent a lifetime beating bad odds. This time, the stakes were personal. This time he was fighting for family. The celebration continued into the night, voices mixing in the darkness. Human and Varani, soldiers and scientists, people who'd been strangers 2 weeks ago and were now bound together by shared struggle. The farm that had been Daniel's lonely retreat became a symbol of something larger, proof that sanctuary mattered, that protecting the vulnerable was worth any cost. Somewhere in the darkness above, Krell ships watched and waited. But here on Earth, under Council Treaty protection, 11 survivors had found home, and one old soldier had found his final mission. The attack came 3 weeks later, not with Krell warships, but with human prejudice weaponized by careful manipulation. A coordinated media campaign flooded social networks with fabricated evidence, supposedly leaked documents proving the Varani women were sleeper agents sent to infiltrate Earth. The lies were sophisticated, mixing real names and locations with manufactured conspiracy. Daniel recognized professional disinformation operations, the kind he'd encountered during his military service. The Krell couldn't attack directly, so they'd hired human proxies to destroy the women's credibility. Protests erupted outside the farm. Angry crowds demanded the aliens' deportation, their fears stoked by carefully crafted propaganda. Local police struggled to maintain order as the situation escalated. Death threats flooded Daniel's communication channels, some promising violence against the Varani, others targeting him personally for harboring them. The women refused to hide. They'd fought too hard for recognition to retreat now. Instead, they doubled their community engagement, volunteering at local hospitals where Nira's medical expertise had already saved 3 human lives. They worked with agricultural cooperatives, sharing Varani farming techniques that increased crop yields. They taught at schools, answered questions, made themselves visible and valuable. Daniel coordinated with Lisa Grant, whose federal resources tracked the disinformation campaign back to shell corporations with known Krell connections. The evidence was clear, but legally insufficient. The Krell had hired human operatives, creating layers of separation that protected them from council sanctions. It was smart, using humanity's own divisions as weapons. "We need to counter their narrative," Grant said during a secure video call. "Show people the truth before this escalates into violence." Marcus Webb suggested a public forum, live streaming, where the Varani women could address accusations directly and viewers could ask questions without edited sound bites or manipulated context. It was risky, putting the women in an uncontrolled environment where hostile questions would come fast and angry. But silence had become more dangerous than exposure. They organized the forum at the community center, the same location where the tribunal had granted asylum. Security was heavy, both human and council observers present to prevent violence. Thousands attended in person while millions watched the live stream. Daniel sat in the front row, rifle hidden but accessible, ready to act if peaceful discourse failed. The questions started hostile. Why should Earth risk Krell retaliation for alien refugees? What proof existed that the women weren't military plants? How could humans trust species so fundamentally different? The Varani women answered each challenge with patience and evidence, presenting documentation, sharing personal stories, demonstrating through calm competence that the accusations were baseless. Then a woman in the audience stood, her voice shaking with emotion. "My daughter was dying from a genetic disorder. No human doctor could help her. Dr. Nira Vale studied her case, developed a treatment protocol combining human and Varani medical knowledge, and,